Hello and welcome back to our HSC Trials Paper 1 episode of Lit Happens. As always, I've got our co-host here with us, Adriel. How are you, Adriel?
I am very well, Belle. I am excited for the second half of the year. I know our kids probably aren't ready for the trials. Some teachers may not be ready. We're all probably not ready, but look, this is why we have our caffeines of choice and we continue on the journey of teaching.
That's it.
Um,
That's
yeah,
it.
100%.
If
It's
I've panicked
it's
you all with the trials title, my apologies, but things are in full swing motion now, aren't they?
yeah, exactly right. It's preparation mode now, and I understand. Come out of this half. We've just come out of our term two break right now and ready to sort of rocket into the term three business end of things for our HSC students. But that doesn't
Yeah.
discount the fact that we do have our junior sort of classes, our 11 classes, if some of us are teaching 11 classes as well. So lots of marking, lots of reports. I know people are having parent teacher interviews around this time. So busy, but
Yeah,
busy
busy
makes
term.
the that's right. Busy makes the days go quicker, and
It's
I
true.
think it's exciting. It's exciting, and ready to talk a little bit about, well, what can we do to help our students with trials? This is the question that comes around this time of the year. We're very evil teachers because we make the trial examinations a lot harder than the HSC exams, according to our students. it's one of the funniest things. Remember, I don't know if you were like this back in the day, but remember you used to hear these rumors and be like, "Oh, HSC trials, like they're marked so much harder, or they're such like teachers just make them hard on purpose." Like this is the thoughts or the discourse that we used to have around it. And I had this conversation with
Yeah.
my kids the other day, and I said, "Guys, let's put on a little bit of a mature thinking cap right now, and let's think about this with just some foresight. You guys are
Mm,
probably sitting your trial exams after 2 to 3 terms, maybe, depending on which school you're at, in your Year 12 course, which means first and foremost, you haven't actually finished the whole course, which is one whole term worth of learning that you haven't come across so far. And secondly, this is the first two paper exam you're sitting, under time conditions, a 2 hour
yeah.
examination and a hour and a half examination. So what like naturally, how do you think you're going to go? I pose this question to the
Yeah,
students and
be
I said,
realistic. Uh-huh.
yeah, that's right. So this is why it seems like the trial's harder. It's not necessarily harder. It's just you don't have
You've never done it.
all of that. Yeah, you don't have all of that experience, and you haven't actually finished your course yet. So naturally speaking, you're not going to feel as comfortable doing this. That's why it's called a HSC trial as opposed to your
Yeah.
HSC examination. And it's funny
Yeah.
though. I love it because I used to be one of the kids that, back in the day, used to have that same narrative. Oh, the teachers mark the trials so hard. We didn't do it too well. You have to reflect on your own processes as you get older. And
Ah,
hopefully today, yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Especially now because most schools will buy a paper. And
yeah,
so, which is kind of nice for you as the teacher because it is a very good replication of what the actual exam. You don't know what's in it. You don't know what they're
yeah,
going to ask. You don't know how
yeah,
specific the questions are going to get. And so it takes the onus, I think, and pressure off the teacher because
yeah,
it's got to go back on the student. Like you can't bring this back to me. Like it's not like I know something that I'm not telling you. It's that complete blank canvas. And
yeah,
I think that's good. That idea of like I always say the guys, it's like a rip the band-aid approach here. Yes, it's not
mm,
going to be pleasant, but it's
yeah,
necessary. And, I always say to them, well, would you rather not have a trial exam and go through the motions and then do the real thing just in real
yeah,
time? And they always
yeah,
say, no, of course, I'd rather have the practice. Well, it's hard, but sometimes things are hard and we just got to
yeah,
face them head on and give it a good crack. And I think most students, when they have that attitude of, I'm just going to prepare as much as I can and try my best and
yeah,
acknowledge that the process of preparing for the trial exam is as important as what I do in the exam. I think there's no
exactly.
greater eye opener to the exam skills, right, Adriel? Like you said, it's two
Yeah,
papers. in 2 days, back to back. It's not an easy
Yeah,
feat, but better they do it now than when
yeah,
it really, really counts.
yeah.
Yeah.
And any adult in
Mhm.
the Australian sort of that has gone through the Australian education system has experienced this. So I always tell the
Yes.
students, I said, you guys aren't the first to have experienced this. Everyone has been
Yeah,
through this
we all do
before.
it. Yeah,
And literally, it's like you just said, it's just one of the little cogs as part of the stepping stones into life. So it's a great skill to develop in terms of understanding the unknowns. As we know in adulthood, there are that
true.
come into your day-to-day life which you need to navigate. And we're going to be navigating some of those unknowns as part of the trial paper today. So it's a nice little segue, I guess, into our first little student question that we'll
Yeah.
have for paper one today.
Yeah, let's get started. We thought we'd do our teacher format. That we think the teacher talk format's been going quite well with the question and answer. So, question one from a student perspective, a really really common thing you might get asked is, well, why do so many capable students underperform in the unseen section of paper one, and what do the high band responses actually do differently? So, just as
Yeah.
a refresher, this is the very first section of the paper where they usually get about maybe a variety of 3 to 6 different short text types with
Yep.
short answer style questions. So,
Yep.
this is a really good one because I feel like students tend to say, I either do really good in unseen or
Mm,
I'm really poor
mm,
at it. They feel like
mm,
there's no in between. What are your
mm.
initial thoughts to that student question, Adriel?
Yeah, look, the unseen questions generally quite daunting for our students because it's like, oh, well, what
Mm,
if I get a text that I don't know? What if it's too long? Like sometimes I hate it when the HSC does this, or even some of the papers that may be bought by schools or whatever, where they don't include like some form of visual or even like a shorter text like a poem. So, so they like to
yeah,
add like a whole heap of
big
lengthy
chunks.
text for the students to go through, and that can be daunting as well. But again, there's different ways in approaching it, and there's different ways we can navigate this. And sometimes it's a lot easier when the text is a little longer because you've got more of a selection to choose from when it comes to your quotes and
True,
techniques. So
true.
I guess it's the perspective and it's how we prepare. That's probably the big thing for many of our students. But I think some of the big things as to why a lot of the capable students underperform is the mindset. It starts off with that. I know in particular when we come to attempting paper one, there are two sections. It's a 90-minute paper, so 45 minutes for each section. I am of the school now where I'll often say to my students, hey guys, do your essay first so that you can get all your quotes off of your chest. You can write it down, especially for those that have pre prepared. I know there are other teachers that will be of the other school of thought, which will say, hey guys, and I know yourself, I can see you nodding as well. You might say,
Yeah,
work through the short answers first because it might be a little bit easier. And again, there are many ways in which we can climb this mountain. It's just whatever works better for you. And I've been saying that to the students as
yeah,
well. We're here to present a whole heap of different approaches to the ways in which we can attempt these examinations. And it's up to you to choose which path you take. There's the path of least resistance according to some teachers, which may be easy for them to go straight up the cliff face, or for others it might be the long way around, but it just is a nicer way in which things fall into place. So yeah, look, a few different things, I guess, when we address that. Again, where do we start? Whatever works well for you. My reasoning
yeah,
for starting with section two is because you're probably stressing about having to remember all your quotes, your essay structure, and if you're not that confident of a student in developing your essays under essay conditions, well, start off with section two, get it off your plate, because then you can come back to section one and you know there's not really much you need to remember. It's more of a skills sort of based section where you're identifying things and you're now analyzing, and then you're obviously developing your responses to the question. I understand though in that regard where people were like, well, what do you do with your 10 minutes reading time? Well, 10 minutes reading time gives you plenty of time to not start off by reading the text but read the questions, even your section 2 question, just so you can start to adapt your maybe your pre-prepared essay or your skeleton essay to the question. Understand what your questions are going to be for the unseen text so that when you go into reading the texts, you're knowing what you're looking for. So, and I know both of us have probably marked enough of these trial HSC papers to clearly see some of those patterns. I think in particular for section one, the capable students are the ones who know their texts and the forms. They know the conventions
Yeah,
associated with each form. I think that's very,
yeah.
very important. They go beyond just the language techniques, but they look at each text holistically. They understand the style, the form, the structure of each particular medium which is presented in those unseen texts. So I think one of the big things that we see with a lot of the capable students is it becomes like a little bit more of a they know what they're looking for. So rather than just being able to identify techniques for the sake of identifying techniques, what these capable students will often do is they'll scan the text. They might find like those higher order techniques, maybe something like an extended metaphor, maybe a bit of imagery. Um, and instead of just naming it and moving on, these kids will move beyond just that listing idea.
Mm,
And I think that's probably the big thing when it comes to these this section. In the
yeah.
pressure of the exam moment, they can find, identify, list that technique, but then they forget the analysis. The question of asking how these techniques represent maybe like one of the human experiences. Because remember, paper one
Mhm.
falls under this common module, so everything's going to link back
Yeah.
to the values, ideas that have been facilitated through the common modules, rubric statements there. So there's a big difference between saying the poet uses personification and maybe saying something along the lines of, let's say, this personification used in the poem, where you might then go along and state the poet's personification of the landscape as a weary, maybe body forces, the reader to confront maybe some sort of ideas. I'm only sort of using this as an example because I've just recently written a unit on Judith Wright's poetry. So Australian landscapes for all those old sort of teachers that may have known this text from back then. This is the reason why I'm using
Mhm.
this example. But this is just one's going to be like an identification of the technique, whereas the other delves into an analysis of what the question is actually asking. So it goes back to what I've
Yeah.
sort of just said. In your reading time, read your questions, understand what they're asking, so that when it comes to your responding to the question, it makes it a lot easier. So yeah, there's two more
Yeah.
things, but yeah, was there anything that you want? I've got two more things to go through, but was there anything you wanted to add there?
Oh, no, I think that point that you made about being concise and purposeful with your analysis, if you have forgotten your rubric, like you said, you've got a bank of your techniques, you should also have a bank of experiences, attitudes, motivations, because
Mm,
you might find that sometimes they're already a key term in your question, and you've got to angle the analysis towards that. But sometimes the question might be quite vague and just says a human experience in general, and you have to
yeah,
be purposeful and identify something specific. And I think students overthink and they forget about that common module rubric component. So, yeah, I think that was a really great point you make. Okay, what other
yeah.
two tips have you got for
So
students in the unseen?
yeah, in the unseen. So I think here's another thing. Like our top students will often read with the question, so they'll read the text with the question
Yeah.
um, in their minds. All right, from the first line of reading that unseen text. That's very, very important. So they don't just read the text casually and then try to sort of retrofit an answer into their own response. What they do is they read whilst they're reading, they're looking for evidence that speaks directly to the specific human experience,
Yeah.
which the question is targeting. So whether that's a key theme in the poem, so it could be something like hope or like one of these major human experience sort of ideas between, or you could look at maybe, let's say, the tension between individual and collective experiences, maybe the way in which identity is shaped. This purposeful sort of reading here now changes everything for your response. So what we start to notice is the details that others miss because the brain is already filtering for relevance. As a teacher, as a marker, I'm always asking, well, what's relevant here? Why is this
Yeah.
placed here? What's their focus? And again, it's a more focused, concise response. And it brings me now into this third sort of idea. A lot of times, students will spend a whole page doing a response to a 4-mark question. However, some of the better students will be very concise. They'll be purposeful in terms of their answers. And these will, more often than not, probably all the time, outscore some of those longer, more descriptive type responses that we often see in the short answer section. So remember, like I just alluded to this before, a 4 mark question, which is a basic identified type question, which is going to be like your first 1 or 2 questions. If you want to know the ways in which the questions are written, have a look at one of our previous episodes from season 1, which we actually break down section 1 here. But it's going to be your easier question. It's the more accessible question, the first question. It does not need a full paragraph or plot summary of what the text is all about. All right. What your markers are going to be looking for is precision. We're looking at how the high band responses will get in, make a clear point about whatever the idea is, the main response to the question, and support it with well chosen direct quotes, techniques, or elements from maybe a visual text, whether it be a visual medium or a poetic medium, whatever it may be. Okay. It has to be medium specific, the techniques as well, those conventions that I alluded to earlier on. And what these students often don't do is they don't waste words. In fact, some of those stronger responses will be a lot tighter than those long-winded responses.
True. They're more
And it'll save you
succinct.
time. That's right. It saves you time, and then that's sort of like that big difference. It's the reps that students put in. And I
Yeah.
know at my current place of employment, it's a big push. Like we've got HSC practice questions at the end of each lesson, which will often address like some sort of short response. So the more the kids do it, the more you do this, the better you're going to get at being able to identify and write with a clear, concise expression, which will allow for you to gain the marks without wasting time. So I think, yeah, those are a few big things for our unseen text that we can often have with our students. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you guys, if we've got any students listening or teachers even that want a deeper understanding of the strategy that goes through to unseen and short answer analysis, we've definitely created a few episodes on that in our podcast. So just go back to some earlier episodes in our earlier seasons, and you'll have a much more detailed breakdown where we talk to you about the mark range versus how much you should be writing. So all these little great tidbits that Adriel has just elaborated on, have a listen to some of our previous episodes for some more depth and detail. Because I think I'll take us through now to our second student question, which is about the section 2 of that paper, which is all about the common module essay. So here with this common module essay, a lot of students always ask us about adapting their essay, and how they do that when it's a more conceptual based question rather than a specific one for their specific core text. So what would we suggest to them about how they might go about that idea of adapting? I know earlier you talked about like skeleton essays and things like that, and I think that is a really, really useful thing for all students to go in with. That way they've got that preparation behind them, but then they've also got that understanding of, you want to get to that band 6, you do have to adapt and modify and make sure you're engaging with the specifics of the question that's been given to you in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in particular, like this is probably one of those biggest pressure points in paper 1 for a lot of
Yeah.
our students. It's like a student's going to walk in with a strong essay. They've worked on it, they've refined it, they've developed it according to their prescribed text, and then they get like a question which just throws them. So it might be something like, how to text represent the complexity of human motivations. Oh no, like I didn't respond to motivations in my pre-prepared response or my skeleton essay. Or, they might get something like, to what extent, these evaluative questions.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a side sort of note here. You'll note that at the beginning of each paper, you will be assessed on. And more often than not, it is a higher order verb. So in standard English, it may tap out at analysis, but every single advanced essay, the verb's going to be evaluate. So it's all the questions going to be all the questions, sorry, are going to be centered around this idea of to what extent. Okay, like you got to make a judgment. So that's just a
Yeah.
little bit of a tidbit. It has to be an evaluative essay. But yeah, so they've got these sort of grand ideas. They're ready to pre-write their response, all this, and suddenly their pre-prepared thesis or their essay doesn't quite fit. Okay, and now they've got like the sweat dripping down their eyebrows, and the time's
Mhm.
ticking and the clock in front of them, and just like, oh my goodness. And then I'm pretty much painting the picture of what many of our students are going to feel if they haven't sat their trials yet. But I think some of the higher performing students that we've had in the past, they actually do this in their first 5, maybe 7 minutes. They take a little bit of a step back. They don't abandon their knowledge of the text or what they've already pre-prepared. They don't spend 5 minutes crying and panicking and thinking, oh no, everything I
Yeah,
prepared is not going to be relevant anymore. What they do is
yeah,
they start to think about how they can reframe their response
yeah,
to suit the
yeah,
question. Okay, their thesis,
yeah.
their ideas. How can you reframe it? So the key is to treat this, treat the conceptual question as a lens. It's not a completely new topic. So if a question is about the complexity of human motivations, you could quickly ask yourself, or the student can quickly ask themselves, well, where in my text do characters act from maybe conflicting sort of desires? Where does the composer show the motivation is purely raw? Like these different ideas that you can ask yourself. um, you can then create a thesis that answers that conceptual question, or you can reframe your thesis to maybe look at the ideas of motivations. And
Motivation.
remember,
Yeah.
everything fits in, like everything aligns. It's not this big chasm between what you've written and what the question's asking. It's just we just need to
True.
look at a little nuance, and it's a little bit of a reframing which will allow you to adjust it. And that's what you should be practicing. Now, especially before your trials, you shouldn't be writing your essays again or starting from scratch. Now it should be like, well, these are 5 or 6 different types of questions. How can I
Yep.
reframe my response
Yep.
to suit each of
Yep.
these respective questions? Okay, so there's a few
Yep.
different ideas there. And I guess what your markers sort of really want to be looking at is they want to still see that deep knowledge of your set text. Now, remember, if you're panicking and in that moment where you spend 10 minutes crying, rather than doing that, and if you've started to reframe it, now your marker's going to start to see, well, this student still has a deep knowledge of their text. All right. Their approach is conceptual. It's not just a mere plot retell, which is often what we get when students panic. They revert back to the path of least resistance. So you as a student will be like, I've only got half an hour left to write my response. What's the quickest thing? Well, let me just tell the marker everything about what I know in the unit, everything about the text, and hopefully magically throw it into the bowl, mix it all together, and hopefully it'll be a nice chocolate brownie by the end of it, or a nice New York baked cheesecake. I love them, these sort of treats, as you can sort of see.
Oddly
Much rather you're
specific.
probably, yeah, that's I know, and much rather you're probably going to get something that looks a little bit more like dirt, or like
Mm,
rubbish at the end of it when you do throw it all together. So I think one of those practical habits that we can start to look at moving forward for this section is in your planning minutes. Think about the conceptual keywords. What is the question really asking at the top of your page? What is it asking of you? And then you might list 2 or 3 different ideas that you have, maybe your topic sentences, and that speak
yeah,
directly to this major concept. Or what are some
yeah,
variations? What are some derivatives
yeah,
of that concept that I can link to my thesis or my
yeah,
topic sentence? And then from there, you can start to build your response. And you'll often find that all the pieces of textual evidence, all the quotes, all your analysis will still fit the mold. It's just you now have a
yes.
way into responding to the question because you spent those few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes at the beginning. That's going to save you 15 minutes at the end of the response. So yeah, those are
Yeah.
some big
And
things
if
for.
yeah. And if the student is looking at practice papers and past questions anyway,
Mm,
they would find that they are coming across conceptual ones that are forcing them and their brain to get in that mode of adaptation, reframing. So
yeah,
this is why if you're like, oh, my teacher's always harping on about past questions, yeah, because the more that you see, the more variations you
yeah,
actually have that work with your base response, and it's getting your brain to think outside of
that's
the
right.
box, which is going to be, yeah, really valuable if you're aiming for that band 6 for sure.
Yeah,
So then,
yeah,
connected to that, another question that a student might say is, well, what separates that solid band 5 or like B plus into a
Yeah.
true band 6 and getting into that 17 to 20 A range,
Mm,
particularly in the time conditions. Like, how do they
mm.
move from the edge of that second highest band into the one that they're really, really aiming for?
Yeah, yeah. I'll maybe paint the quick little picture here. So the difference in a lot of those band 5 and 6 responses is quite nuanced. It's quite minimal. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
rarely about knowing more of the text. Like these kids will know the same amount of information the band 5 kid, the band 6 response student or candidate
yeah,
will have a same understanding of the text, all right? The
yeah,
essay, however, is going to be more about the depth, the way that ideas are integrated, and the control of language. Like
yes,
these are the big sort of ideas. All right, so your band 5 responses will tend to cover more ground, so they've ticked the boxes. So they'll move from
yeah,
several sort of ideas, they might identify techniques, they'll make solid links to the human experiences, but the analysis um, it remains competent, okay? Or depending on what the verb may be for the essay, marking criteria, it could be competent, it could be effective rather than highly effective. Like these are the different verbs that we're moving towards in the
true.
HSC descriptors. Have a read of these before you go in as well. There is a lot of information on the NESA website regarding this as well. So the analysis is often, let's just use the word competent for a B range response rather than effective, and the structure is clear, but it'll often stay at this level um, of this is what the technique shows that the character is blah blah blah, right? And they've just ticked the boxes. The technique's identified. This is what it does. There's a sound or a competent form of analysis relative there. The band 6
Mm,
responses will go a little bit further. All right, they're going to explore the implications. They're going to ask what the idea reveals about the broader human condition, or how the composer will often use structural forces or choices. So there's a variety of techniques rather than just language techniques that are being used in the analysis. Um, and there's going to be that personal voice that really shines through. All right, so it's a big difference between maybe explaining a moment and then maybe illuminating the whole world around that poem. I use this analysis actually, this analogy the other day with my students. Each year as teachers, you get new different thoughts, and I don't know why Shrek was on my mind, but you know those famous scenes where it's like in Shrek when he's talking about the layers, all right? It's like ogres have layers. They're like onions. Well, onions sorry, have
mhm,
layers. They're like ogres. Yeah,
mhm.
I have completely fried that example, but I said to my
No, no,
students, I
you're
said, "There's a
still on track. We get you.
yeah."
We get you.
So
Mhm.
there's a difference between like a close study and then a critical study. Okay.
Yeah,
Now, in a close study, we're looking at unpacking everything within the realm of the text. So I drew on the board this little circle of the world, and you're looking at language, style, construction of the text, and everything within the text, maybe even the context of the text. All right. A critical study, however, or a critical response to that response is going to have all of those elements of the close study in the middle. You can see my little circle here. I said, your close study is going to be like your planet Earth. It's just a, yep. Your critical study is going to be a little bit more like that planet Saturn. Yep, it's got different layers, rings
mm,
around it.
mhm.
So you've got the world of your text, then you've got like the world of your author, the didactic choices, authorial intent. Then you've got literary
Yep,
perspectives on another layer, and then you've got your own judgment.
yep, yep.
Now, your band 5 responses will probably just stick to the first two realms or layers, whereas the critical responses, the more nuanced responses, are going to encompass all of the ideas that I've just mentioned through
Yeah.
a concise framework, which is their essay, their essay structure. Now, again, there's no easy fix to it. It's practice makes perfect. The more that we chip away at it, the more that you're going to become comfortable with this writing process. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I think those are like some big ideas. So, again, we'll see with our higher band students, they'll weave the rubric language naturally in to the response. Like I
Yeah,
said, brevity. They
yeah,
don't just drop in phrases just for the sake of dropping phrases as a checklist. So instead, they
yeah,
have an understanding of the language of the rubric, which becomes a part of their own analytical voice. This is that judgment
yeah,
phase in that critical study that I was speaking about. Um, the rubric concepts are integrated well into their response to the question. And
yeah.
this is a big thing, all right? Some band 6 responses will not be perfect in terms of control. However, there is
Mm,
a greater level of control in terms of the way in which the language has been presented. All right. Markers will look at your essays as a first draft. That's very important for you guys to consider this. There may be minimal inconsistencies. Overall, the whole response is going to be tighter than the band 5 response. So your band 6 essay is going to maintain argument consistency, even when they are writing against the pressures of the clock, which is counting down. Topic sentences will stay sharp. They're relevant to the thesis. Your evidence is chosen for relevance rather than just for the sake of putting it in. And your expression remains precise through the entirety of the
mm,
response. Okay,
yeah.
so those are some of those big sort of practical sort of ideas that will separate that band 5 and 6 response for our students.
Yeah, absolutely. That idea of that, how sustained the thesis is and how tight
Mm,
knit your evaluation is across the piece is so important because a band five might do that really mechanically. Like, here's my
mm,
thesis. It's kind of specific, but maybe also kind of a bit vague. And I can
yeah,
see it here in my topic sentence and maybe in some links, but your band six is it's gonna very clearly connect from the intro into the topics and links, and even within where they've got the analysis of their evidence is always going to come back to what their thesis and evaluation is. So
yeah,
how kind of tight knit, yeah, tight knit it is, because that's a key marker of sophistication, isn't it?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I know some students are like, oh, but it's hard in exam conditions. Yeah, well, we can't give you all band sixes. It's just
That's
the
right.
nature of the HSC and the overall ATAR. There's got to be like delineations. So
Yeah,
then, lastly, Adriel, for this episode on paper one
yep.
trial, then in terms of like a teacher question or a teacher perspective here, they might be asking, particularly some more new scheme teachers teaching, a year 12 cohort for the first or
Mm,
second time, what can they actually do then in the classroom with them to help their students develop these transferable skills for both of
mm,
these sections in paper one? Because it's one thing to just give past papers and go just try and answer them, like that's only part
mm.
of it. How do they actually teach some skill or maybe strategy to support students when they are practicing those past
Yeah,
papers?
yeah. I think the big one for me to start off with is just the time writing. So you want kids familiarizing themselves with writing under time pressure. So, they can write the best response to a 4-mark question, but they might spend 40 minutes writing that response. Well, what's the use? They're going to get 4 out of 20 for
Yeah.
that section, especially and again, if we transfer that to the essay, they might write the best introduction, but if they don't have the whole essay, what's the use? So
Yeah.
time writing is very, very important. And that's one of the things I have. Google Timer is the best thing. Put a big clock down, countdown. All right, you've got 5 minutes. 5 minutes is too short. You've got 8 minutes to do a 4-mark question. You've got 8 minutes to write your introduction. So really start to develop that idea right from the
Yeah.
beginning for our students and drill that in. Okay, it's going to be a very big idea for essays and adaptation sort of tasks. I would really work on thesis development.
Mhm.
Thesis writing is
Yeah.
very, very transferable across your unseen texts and your essay writing because you think about it. For an unseen text, what are they doing? They're identifying the main idea, aren't they? And when you're developing a thesis in an essay, you are obviously expanding on what the main idea is, what your response is to the question. So having a lot of task space around developing thesis, so responding to questions, what are the keywords I can use, and integrating rubric terminology in order to develop my response, especially when it comes to our essay writing here as well. The other big thing is feedback. All right. So feedback is going to be a tough thing. English teachers have it the worst when it comes to feedback because we don't
Yeah.
know what's too much and what's too little. I'm going to just put this out there right from the beginning. The work needs to remain the students' work. It can't be us giving them suggestions on what to write. Okay. So a lot of the times we can fall into the trap as teachers saying, well, I want this kid to do well. I may as well just give them some suggestions. This is what you should write, or this is what I should change their writing to. I've been down that path before, but we'll be doing that kid a disservice because then they lose their voice. Then they're trying to work towards writing in your voice, and their voice then becomes inconsistent in their response. It becomes
True.
inauthentic, and that's where they'll start to stress, and they might not even finish writing their essay because they've got this unrealistic expectation which they're writing towards. So you really want to encourage them with really intentional questions. So rather than just add more analysis, or this needs more flair, or this needs to be better, like, what are the how and why questions that you're asking your kids? Well, you've identified this technique. Why does, or how does this relate back to supporting your argument? You've presented like a thesis statement, but why have you addressed it in such a general manner? What are some of the key areas which you could focus on? So you're adding 3 or 4 more words in your question, but it's more intentional questioning when it comes to your feedback. This also saves
Mm.
time for you as the teacher, because you can just block it. So, for example, if you're a teacher looking at a body paragraph, you might ask all of these intentional questions for their first body paragraph, and you can then get the student to go on and say, well, I've asked you these questions for this first paragraph. Where do you think it's applicable now for your second and third body paragraph, if we're going through one of these sorts of responses? I really think that is going to serve your students a lot better, because it's going to then allow them to have their authentic voice. It's them actually doing the work, and will save you countless hours of time as a teacher, not having to worry about every single student. Okay. And at the end of the day, it's their HSC. If they're going to put the work in, they're going to see the fruits of it, whether it be in the HSC exam, or whether they go to tertiary education, or whether in life. This is what
Yeah.
I've come to realize as a teacher. It's not about the mark. The mark's nice, but it's about what skill we're allowing or equipping our students to
Yeah.
have for life after school. Remember, HSC is a
Yeah.
stepping stone. It's not the end of life. It's literally the beginning. I said this to my students the other day. I said, I don't even remember what my HSC ATAR was. And honestly, it was probably rubbish compared to what I would be capable of doing now, because learning is lifelong. And in the
Yeah.
last 15 years of life, I have had a lot more of maturity, mature approach, shall I say, to my learning and understanding of it than what I would have had when I was a student going through year 12 high school.
Mm.
So these are things that our teachers will have to understand as well. But yeah, there's a few different ideas
Yeah.
there for our teachers.
No, absolutely. And also, we've also done episodes unpacking common essay writing in general, with
Mm,
lots of examples of different strategies that Adriel and I have used in different classes, because obviously each cohort and each group might be different. So sometimes we need to vary that up. But I think, Adriel has made a really good point to all of you guys. It's that balance between they've got to understand their text and know what they've got to do with it, but also within the confinement of these exam timings and
mm,
conditions. And it's like two different things. One, they're being assessed on how well they understand their text, but part of the assessment is also how well they can take that exam. And I know
yeah.
that in itself is a very controversial thing in education. We've probably all talked about it in our staff rooms.
Mm,
The ethics of that idea of the be all end all exam. But at the end of the day, that's what the HSC is right now. And what we've just got to do is keep our kids positive and remind them of the skills. And even though they're
yeah.
exam skills, it's also reflecting that real world, the challenge, the problem solving, the resilience. And
Yep.
as long as I know Adriel and I, we're very similar in that we always say to our kids, as long
Mm,
as you can hold your head high and say, I
yeah.
prepared as much as I could, I tried as much as I can, that's at the end of the day what we want from them. Yes, we would love them to get band sixes, for their own sense of achievement, but reality is we're all different, as long as we're all trying our best and giving it that crack. And the trial is beautiful for that, because it'll give them
Mm,
the heads up, and then hopefully the confidence to move into the final exam next
yeah.
term. But
Yeah.
yeah,
100%.
you've offered some really good approaches there for those student and teacher questions, Adriel. I'm sure that a lot of people will be enjoying this refresher right before their trial exams are due to take place. We know
Yeah.
it's a busy term. Students, good luck. Teachers,
Yep.
thank you and keep at it. And thanks everyone for listening. Anything else,
Yeah.
Adriel, I might have missed that you want
No, I
to
think
tap on as we wrap up?
I think that's perfectly fine. Remember to have good sleep, good lifestyle as well. Your
Yeah,
caffeine's
good
at first
food.
ready to go. like I say, good foods as well. Just enjoy life, to be honest. Remember, at the end of the day, every day is a new day, and you should be appreciative of it. We live in a great country here in Australia, so the opportunities are abundant for us, and it's
Yeah.
never the end. It's always a new day and new opportunities. So, yeah, have a great week, have a great day, and we'll be in your ears next week with paper two, I think. Yeah. So, thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Bill, for just guiding this. I'll catch you guys next week.
Pleasure.